All right, so here starts our next video. So this one's going to be a little bit more interesting. We're going to be doing a little bit more stuff here. We're going to create our first React component. It's going to be a Hello World component, just like anywhere else and any other start of an application. And we're going to take that and we're going to write a test, a UI test for it, using Jest and Enzyme. So we're going to be installing Enzyme, configuring it, and doing a little bit of configuration to our Jest platform we have right now that was given to us from our Create React app. So there's a couple things we need to do first, and I'll share my screen and we'll get started. So we're kind of leaving off where we were on the last video. So if we see here, move this down a little bit. So we have our Whip React app. So this is where we're at right now. So where we left off on the last video. So on this video, there's going to be a couple things we're going to do. So the main things we're going to focus on is including a security check for NPM modules. So you have to be really careful. Everybody's popping NPM modules like candy, from a friend told me one time. It's kind of funny. But everybody just uses these things, and there's a lot of malicious software out there. So you have to be really careful on what kind of NPM modules you use. So we'll be using something called NPS, which is Node Modules Security, but I forgot what the P stands for. But anyways, we can take a look at that in the browser whenever we download that, and we'll run that as a script. And we're going to be creating some Node scripts in here. So you should understand about Node scripts. So you should be a little bit more familiar with what those do. We're going to install Enzyme. We're going to configure Enzyme with Jest. We're going to do a little bit more configuration with Jest, it's like what we talked about before. And we're also going to allow us to choose the coverage we want to display. So we're going to display coverage and also show notifications in our Jest test, and let us be notified whenever those are run successfully or not successfully. And also run some code coverage reports, which is kind of cool. So we're going to run some code coverage in our JavaScript, let us know what files have been covered, what lines have been covered. Also, it's going to create a script that's going to open up in the HTML and host that up in a browser and actually be able to see what lines we're actually running. So it's going to be pretty interesting. Quite a few things going on here. So to start off with, we're kind of setting up and doing some configuration. So before we go anywhere much further, let's go ahead and set up our folder structure. So usually whenever I do a folder structure, I like to create a couple different folders. So we're going to create a folder for our components, and then we're going to create a folder for our containers. Talk about containers and components. Think about them as smart versus dumb components, people call them, or stateful versus stateless components. That's kind of what our containers and components are for. So we also have our reducers, and you cannot have your reducers and everything in Redux and React without having your actions. I like creating this one folder called action requests. And action requests are going to have your async methods. Like if you're going to be making asynchronous calls to an AWS service backend or something like that, well, then we put our AWS calls, sync calls, inside of action requests. And our thunks will call action requests. We'll talk about thunks later whenever we actually start working with actions. But thunks are kind of what makes our fetch calls or API calls. So that's kind of where that's going to go. But little touch on that a lot more later. So action requests, and then we also have our constants. So create a constants folder. And all these will make more sense later, but let's just go and get this folder structure set up so we can move forward a little faster moving forward. So first thing we need to do is we need to install our security script. So if we take a look here, we call npm, and it's called security check. So as you can see, I've already looked at it. Node security platform command line tool. So down here kind of talks about, the security. runs and all that different types of things you can do here. But what we just need to do is we just need to do this NSP check, and we want to do that every time we start our script. So let's go and let's talk a little bit about what NPM scripts are. So if we look here, go ahead and close this guy. So your NPM scripts are going to live inside your package.json file. And they start off with this root underneath your main package. We can close some of these things to kind of hide this. But so it's underneath your main package, underneath your kind of root right here. So scripts. So you have something called start, build, and test. So one thing that a lot of people don't seem to know, but if you put something on here, and you put something out here called pre, like type. So you can have pre and post. And we probably have to run this to make sure we're doing it right, but you can have a pre and post, right? Like down here. And what would happen is if you did an NPM start, pre would run first, and then post would run second. But pretty sure it's called pre. I'm kind of going brain dead right now. But so anyways, but there is a way to do a pre and a post. So you can take a look at those later, but and get a little bit more detail in there. But so if we do npm start, it'll run this script start right here. So there's a folder called scripts, and there's a start and build and stuff in there. And we can do an npm run test or npm test. But so npm only runs certain scripts with certain names that are defaults. So start and test are kind of defaults. So you can do npm test or npm start, but you don't have to do run. But let's check with test and just make sure. Like I said, it's kind of live coding here. So let's create our tester. So what we have to do is we need to create a new script that we can run with npm run, and what we want to call it is security, and let's call it check. The security check. So what security check is going to do is it's going to actually run this NSP check. And we saw that before from our browser here, NSP check. And read more about that if you want to know more about it and see what's going on. But let's go ahead and let's run our security check just so we can see how this thing actually works. So we see that it's called security-check. We do npm run security-check. And it's probably because we haven't installed it yet. So let's do an npmi. We want to put it in, so save dev. So we do npmi, which is npm install, just short. And then -- save -dev. And I think you can also do -d, but save dev. So we want to do NSP. So NSP, so we want to install this as a dev dependency. If we did -- save, then it would save it as a regular dependency. So now we have this. So now we just installed our npm module. So let's go through here and let's run this again. So it seems like no such file directory user package JSON. Oh, I need to go inside client and keep doing that. Okay, let's do our thing again. So we probably installed. No. Let's see if this runs. Let's just go. Let's go for it. NSP check. So it's running. It's going through all our npm modules and verifying that they're all good. So we do have vulnerable packages here. So it tells us which ones might be messed up. So look at that. There's one, prototype pollution attack. So this is interesting. So we haven't installed any npm modules except for the create React app. So there's one called Hoic. This is interesting. So it's definitely something we want to dig into. Webpack dev server. So this is actually inside of the Webpack dev server. And this one is inside of Webpack. So it says, so it looks like maybe something got introduced into Webpack npm module that could be a possible problem. So so we should really dig into this a little bit more, especially when we're dealing with user login names, passwords, credit cards. But right now, this is just a demo for this application with testing. So we're not going to really worry about this right now because it is coming from something that is widely used. Webpack is very huge. A lot of people use it. It's very interesting that this security check pulled up Webpack. So interesting. But anyways, we can see that that it ran. And then we do have a complete log. This run could be found here. Security check script. This is probably not a problem. So it looks like NSP check here. So it looks like maybe we need to incorporate a little bit more. But it looks like it just ran and it gave us our NPM update of the check here. So that's how you create a script. So we installed an NPM module called NSP, and we created a new security check NPM script and ran that. And we got some interesting feedback talking about there's 2 vulnerabilities inside of Webpack, which is interesting. Okay, so anyways, let's move forward. And so there's a couple things we need to do in order to first create our application. So first, what we need to do is we need to create a component. So what we want to do is we want to test a new component. So before we can really go and start configuring stuff, we need to know what we need to configure. So let's go just create our first React component here. And I'll get rid of this guy. So let's go and create a React component. So let's create a new folder inside of components. We're going to call it Hello World. And then inside Hello World, we need a new JSX file. So JSX is what is, is the actual type of code that runs for React. So I do have this thing, some snippets I've created myself, so I don't have to really type a lot of stuff in. But so here we're going to call it Hello World. Takes no parameters. And then we don't need this because we're not going to do anything, test it with that. We don't need prop types because we're not passing any props to it. And we just do export default Hello World. And we just say Hello World here, right? Gotta love Hello Worlds. So anytime we do any kind of testing, we need a data-QA target. This is going to save you a lot of headache. And we'll call it Hello World Wrapper. So this is going to save you a lot of headache. If you're trying to select things by CSS class names and you have all your tests written according to class names or other type of elements, well, if those class names change, and sometimes they do whenever you restyle things, and well, then your class name changes. Well, now your tests are broken. But that has nothing to do with styles or anything except for just tests. So this should never change. So we'll just keep that as constant and understand that. So now we have this Hello World wrapper, data QA target. Call it whatever you want, but I go data QA target. So now we have this. So now what we want to do is, this is a Jest thing that comes configured. You can configure any way you want. But in order to run a test, you have to do 2 underscores, tests, underscore. So 2 underscores in front, 2 underscores in the back, tests in the center. So now what we need to do is we need to create a new file, and let's call it hello world.jest.test.js. And as we said before in some of the other videos, this can be whatever, but you just need to init with .test.js. It can be whatever you want before it. So here's a test. So I do have another snippet I'm going to use, so I don't have to type all this out, but just test. And we have hello world component path. There's hello world right there. Describe test, testing UI elements inside hello world component. And then this one, let's just say should render hello world component. Okay, So now what we have is just a regular test that is failing. So this just starts off with the basic fail. And then if we go in here, so we can't run this yet. So we can't actually run this code yet because we actually need Enzyme. So in order to use Enzyme is a testing tool that you can use with many different applications or frameworks, I mean. So that you can like test things with CSS. It makes it very easy. And you're going to see an example of this here in a second. So in order to install Enzyme, we have to install that through our dev dependencies. So what we do, if you remember, npmi --save-dev, and it's called Enzyme. So let's install Enzyme here. And I actually forgot. So, so in order for Enzyme to work with Jest, there's a couple things we have to do. First, what we have to do is we have to go and create a new file. So inside of config, open up Jest. Let's create a new file in here. This is called Jest Enzyme setup.js. So this file is the file that we're going to need to write some code to get Enzyme to work with Jest. So one thing we need to do first before we do all that is we need to go down to the package.json file. We need to go down to where you can see our Enzyme has been saved. So go down to your Jest configuration. Let's close this so it makes it a little bit easier to view. Those are scripts. Here's our Jest configuration. So there's something called setup files, and it takes an array of paths. So what we want to do is we want to just add another file to our setup. So root directory is the root directory, which is going to be our client. It's going to be our root directory. So client. So what we want to do is we want to go to our config folder. We want to go inside Jest, and we want to add Jest Enzyme setup.js. Okay, so we have that saved. So now we're good here because we set up in our setup file. Now we need to go over to Jest setup, and there's some code we have to bring in here. So in order to get this code to work, we need to first import Enzyme from Enzyme because we just installed it. So now we have access to it. So next what we need to do is we need to import something called an adapter from Enzyme. Sorry, I'm looking at some documentation over here. Enzyme adapter React 16. And then we also have to add some more stuff. So we have to configure Enzyme. So we use our Enzyme that we created, imported in, and we need to configure. And what we need to do is we need to send our adapter into our configuration. So it looks like our adapter takes a function and it takes an object, and our object will be adapter new adapter. Okay. All right, so now what we need to do is let's go look at this and see what this thing is actually all about. So you can see where I'm actually came up with this. So Enzyme adapter is right here. So it's from Airbnb, so it can be trusted. The Airbnb is a very well-known company. So upgrading Enzyme 2.0 React 16. So there's some. This is where I read about that. So we need to actually, whenever we did our save dev Enzyme, we should have done this as well, but we didn't. So now we need to go back and do that. Open up our terminal again. Let's do npmi save dev, because it's going to dev dependencies, and Enzyme adapter React 16. So now while that loads up, let's go back over here to our actual component, make sure we have the same name. We do, we're good. So now that Jest Enzyme, so now we'll have Jest set up with Enzyme whenever we actually go and run our application here. So we should be good, just waiting for this to load up. So as you remember, we have our data QA target called Hello World Wrapper. So let's go and write our test. And we kind of put this snippet out here. We have our Hello World. We have shallow and mount. Shallow runs a lot faster than mount does. Shallow just renders, or doesn't even really render. It just loads up our Hello World, but does not render any children or anything. So if you have another component with the child component in there, it will not render the child component. It will only say that the child component is there, but does not render it. So you cannot look for items inside of child components. But mount allows you to do that. So mount pretty much renders like a browser, but in what's called JS DOM. And it puts everything inside there so you can actually query it just like any other thing that you need to do with Enzyme. So you can query any kind of CSS or HTML or whatever. But shallow runs a little bit faster because it doesn't load everything into the JS DOM for us. We don't need this. And so here, now we have Enzyme Hello World. So let's just run this, and we should have a failing test first. So I would say that everybody should do an npmi-g for global. So npm install global jest and hit enter. And then let this run and load jest up. This is going to help you. And then, so now after you have that loaded, what we can do is we can do jest hello world. And what you can see, we didn't load, we didn't like do our whole hello world.jest.test because we just need to put in like a regular expression that comes close. If you have a lot of different components that start with hello, it will run everything that starts with hello. But we only have one hello world thing, so we can just put hello world. We don't have to type out everything. We can even just type in something like just HEL, and it'll run our hello world because it's the only one that comes close to it. It's like a regular expression. So you can see our value to equal received true. So we expected false, and that expected true to equal false. So far that is what we're expecting, even though it's a failed test. But let's write a passing test to actually find our UI element. So what we need to do is we need a new constant called wrapper. Const is just a ES6 term. It can only be created once, and it cannot be updated. It's kind of like an immutable variable. And then inlet is the opposite. It's immutable. So, and then const wrapper equals, and what we need to do now, we want to use shallow because it's faster, and we don't need to look at its children. And we want to bring in our hello world component. So shallow is going to bring in our hello world component on a shallow render. And now what we want to do is we want to make sure our element is actually there. So, and we actually put a data QA target on there on the actual wrapper. So let's go and check that and make sure that is there as what we expected. So wrapper.find. So find is something you can find inside of Enzyme. So let's go look at Enzyme. If we look at Enzyme here, here's Enzyme. Let's look at the API documentation. It talks about, there's the adapters we need for different versions of React. Talked about, and here's how we set up our adapter, which we've already done. And then, instead of going through this trying to find it, I'm just going to put Enzyme find, because I know that will bring me just right to what I need. So here is the API documentation. So we see that wrapper.find, we can look for CSS or HTML, any kind of CSS3 selector. So that's what we want to do here. So with any kind of CSS3 selector or 2, whatever, but what we're looking for is a HTML attribute. Whenever we look for an HTML attribute inside of CSS, we have to put square brackets. And then you have to put in your data dash QA target equals double quotes, and what we called it is hello world wrapper. So we expect this to be found. So in order to do this, what find does is it returns an array. So what an array has a length. So we expect this length to be 1. because we only have one of these. So we only have one data QA target, hello world. So if this finds what we're looking for, this test should now become successful. So let's try this. And we can do just HEL again. So now we have a test, passing test. So let's take off R off of here. So now it's looking for, let's just call it hello world. So data QA target hello world. Let's see, can it find that? Well, it's going to fail because hello world is not in there. So it is hello world dash wrapper. So I'll put this back. So now we have a passing test. Okay, so now we have a component. We have a passing test. So now what we want to do is, like, say your boss comes by and says, hey, you know, what is your current code coverage looking like for your component that you're creating? You're like, oh, well, hold on, let me show you. And it's like, you think, oh, code coverage, that's something managers should be doing. Well, hey, you know, any junior dev, anybody can do this. It makes it super easy. But in order to do this, we have to install a couple things. And this should already be installed whenever your boss comes by and asks you that, or else you say, hold on, let me make some NPM scripts. So let's go make some NPM scripts. We need to go to the package, JSON, because that's where the NPM scripts live. And let's go down to the scripts. Here they are. So there's a couple different scripts we need to create, right? So let's create a script called, we already have a script called test, so let's go update this. We do not want what they gave us. We want to create our own testing. Get rid of that guy. So now what we want to do is we want to create our own test, and what it is, it's called Jest, and Jest is installed. It's already part of the Create React app, so they've already installed it for us in their package JSON file. We can see Jest installed right here in its version 20.0.4. Let's go back to our scripts, and then we have a Jest right here. Well, we want to do no cache. And if you want to know about no cache, Google it. It'd be a nice little thing for you to look at. Okay. And then, so we have a test here called no cache. Well, now let's create a test, and what we want to do is every time we update a test or create a test and update it or anything, we want our test to run. So if we run npm run test watch, then it's actually going to watch all of our files, and whenever we make a change, it's going to run our test for us. So then we get notified right then and there whenever we're creating code, but without even having to run our tests. We can just leave that watching. So in order to make that work, we have to do just, and I believe it's dash 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 watch to verify that. But I believe it's, sorry, it's npm run. That's where the live stuff comes interesting. npm run test dash 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 watch, because we're just adding another element at the end of the jest command. That's right. npm run test dash 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 watch. Yeah. So now what we want to do is we want to watch. What else do we want to do? We want to watch our tests. We also want to look at the coverage. So test coverage. So coverage is gonna run something called Istanbul, and it's built into Jest, so it's going to give us a code coverage inside of our terminal. So that's kind of handy to be able to look at something really quick and see what's going on there. So in order to run our coverage, it's kind of like the same thing. npm run test, which is going to run this guy. npm run test, run this guy. It's going to be jest dash dash no dash cache. So npm run test is going to run this guy. Well, also we want to add another, you know, kind of thing to the end of it. So we want to run coverage. So running this is the same thing as running npm test dash dash coverage. It's the same thing. It's just we're kind of creating. We just want to create different ways to run our npm scripts. So now this is going to be very interesting. So now we have coverage, and I guess before we go to the next interesting thing, let's just go and let's just check out this coverage. Let's see kind of like what it does. And all this is already built into Jest. There's nothing else we need to do. So let's pull up our terminal, and let's run our npm run test coverage, just like it is in there, coverage. So now what we're doing is we're running our tests, we're running coverage, we're seeing what's going on, and then we probably need to take a look at this here in a second. But this gives us our coverage of what is actually going on here. So, hey, look, our hello world, 100% coverage, 100% in our branch, 100% of the functions, 100% of the lines. Boom, 100%. Now, you can't always cover 100% of all your files or all your lines in every file because not everything needs to be tested. If you do that, you're just going to have so many tests, and then you ultimately could end up running your production builds whenever you go to a CI. The CI is called continuous integration. So every time you check in, you have your tests that run, and if they're successful, then it goes to a test environment or maybe even production. Depends on how you guys want to set that up for your company or whatever you're doing. But so this gives us our coverage. So we see our hello world's covered. Well, that's great. So then I can show your boss, but it gets even better. But let's see what this error is about. This error is saying something about test coverage scripts, probably not additional, just no cache, test coverage. There's an app.js here. There's probably not a problem could be found. Completed test. Let's just do npm test and let's check this out. Let's see what's going on here. Maybe that might give us something else. Document is not defined. I never use document. It is an app test.js. So that's a test that Create React app gave us. Well, we're running our own test, so we don't even want that. That is what's tripping us up. So let's go to source, app test. Let's delete this guy. Later, you're messing us up. All right, he's gone. Run our test. So see how we didn't have to do npm run test? You can do npm test, npm start, and there might be some other ones, but if you run them within, so the deal is if you run a script within another script, I think you need to run npm run test and not just npm test -- watch. But in order to do that, let's check it out. Maybe you can. npm test. Let's run our coverage. Nope, this one's our watch. So npm test. Oh, we have to do run test watch. Looks like it still works. So yeah, we don't even have to do npm run test. We can just do npm test -- coverage. Saves a little couple of lines of code, right? But look, so this test watch, we can't just do npm test watch. We'll get an error, I believe. Test watch. So yeah, you have to do npm run test watch. There's only a few special keywords with your npm scripts of what you can do and how you can run that. So just keep in mind. So now what we need to do is whenever we run our tests, let's also, yeah, anyways, we'll deal with that later. I don't want to jump ahead too far. Okay, so now what we can do is like we just ran our coverage, so we saw our coverage. We'll check this out. There's this folder in here now called coverage. There's an iCov report with some HTML files and stuff in it, index.html. Well, let's run something. Let's make a new npm script and let's open this bad boy. So let's run something called open coverage. This is something really awesome that's just built into Jest, and that's why I really say people should use it. So in order to do this open coverage, there's a couple things we need to do here. So open coverage, and we need to do an npm run, and we need to do test, and we need to run coverage. So npm run test coverage is going to run this guy. So npm run test coverage. So this guy is going to run this guy, but that's not just all. We're going to do some more here. Double and, so we want to do that, and we want to do this next thing. And this next thing, what we want to do is we want to do something called open, and we're going to give a path from our actual root that we're in, and we want to actually call coverage because that's the name of the folder. And inside of that folder, there's actually that lcov report. Index.html. It's all right. So coverage lcov report, index.html. So that's what we want to do here. So yeah, so check this out. This is kind of neat. But you say, hey, wait a minute, what does open do? Is that just built into Node? No, it's not. That's something we need to install. So you can see I've already looked at it. Here's open. It's been installed 508,000 times in the last 7 days. So, you know, people are using it. So, or, you know, so I mean, we're good. There's probably not going to have a lot of problems, but hey, we don't have to worry about it. We have the NSP check. So let's go and let's install open. npm I -- save dev, because it is the dev dependency, supports our dev, and open. So what open does is like actually creates it. You tell it what index file you want to open or whatever you want to open, and you can actually open it, and it opens up in the browser for you and just runs it and runs a server and everything for you. So it's really neat little thing that packaged up for us. So if we run this open coverage and we run our test, later on what we'll do is we'll include this security check and we'll do a parallel run. So what we'll do is we'll do our check, or our security check and everything else, and we'll do this with the npm run all, and which maybe we can end up doing up here. So npm -run -all, I believe that's how it goes. And then what we want to do is security check. This doesn't work, we'll just go back. Security check. Just look at npm run all right quick. Never hurts to Google npm run all. npm run all looks like it's an npm script, so, or npm module. So we need to download that as well. So we need to do the same thing, but save dev, npm -run -all. Include this guy in there. So how do we use this? npm run all dev. Go to GitHub. Maybe I'll have a little bit more info for us. npm run all parallel works well on Windows as well. npm run clean and npm run build CSS and npm run all clean build. So it looks like there's no comma. npm run all security check. Node. Well, this is a Node script, so this is maybe a little bit different. But anyways, we'll deal with that here in a minute. But so now we just installed. So where we left off is the open coverage. So that just got through being installed. Open just got installed. So now we have that. So let's run this guy. Let's do it npm run open coverage. So it's running our Jest test. So we just ran our test, did our code coverage. This opened up in the other window and we pull it over. So this is what actually got popped open for us whenever we actually ran this. So we got our code coverage inside of our terminal, ran our tests. So test coverage. So let's do this. Open coverage, first thing happened is test coverage and open coverage. Test coverage ran, which just no cache -- coverage. We got our coverage here, and then it opened up this nifty guy. So check this out. So here's our hello world component, and we can see that it's 100%, 2 of 2, branches 100%. This is all 100% green. We're all covered. Well, let's look at this. Here's source. Looks like there's 57 items in here. Branches 0%, nothing's covered inside source. So let's go and let's look app.js. Well, look, it's like here's the things that are in red that are not covered in our items here. So then you can actually see an overall code coverage for your whole application. We're at 5.26%. Statements, lines of code coverage is 6.9. You want to say about 80%. Try to hit for 80. But anyways, that gives you a good idea about how much of your application is covered. And this is pretty big. So let's kind of go over kind of the stuff we did. We created a coverage folder. We actually, well, that was made for us, but we created a couple, let's see what I do here. Oh, let's just get rid of this. We'll deal with this later. And we'll get a little bit more for sure on what to do with that. So anyways, but so we created test watch, test coverage, Open coverage, which opens up that little browser, nifty browser item there. Security check to make sure we don't have any vulnerabilities, but we did find some in Webpack, very interesting. We could probably run it again to check out our open and some of our other newly installed NPM modules. So now we have a little bit more understanding about NPM scripts, and we'll talk a little bit more about pre and post with start and pre and post with test and things like that later. We'll also create some build scripts as well that will kind of run some scripts inside of this tools folder. So make sure you create that tools folder for the next video. And we also updated our Jest setup files with our Jest enzyme. We brought in Enzyme. We updated our Jest enzyme setup with our adapter. And Visual Studio has something cool over here. You can click over here, see what files were updated. You can click on that, get a diff of what was going on. There's also something called Git Lens, which is really cool. That kind of tells you, you know, what was kind of, that's not, but what was changed, and you can see who did it. So if I look at this line, I did it a few seconds ago, uncommitted change. So there's some changes we need to commit. We deleted the app test. We created a component called Hello World. We tested it. We got it successful. We have 100% code coverage on our new component. So I will leave that here, get status. So we see we have these items. So let's add everything, get commit. Let's make a commit message for this. So we added enzyme Jest config update with enzyme and hello world component. So maybe we should have made a couple commits instead of committing it all together and kind of broken this apart. But we can just list out what we did here. It's always good to have a working story of what's going on in your commits. But a hello world component, hello world component tested, NPM scripts created for test and coverage, open coverage HTML posting on NPM script run, NPM script, open coverage. All right, that kind of talks about kind of what we did here. So we'll commit that, git push. So that is pushed up to our GitHub. If we go to GitHub, let's check it out. I always like to look at GitHub and see my green squares going on for the day. So you can see I got one for today. Awesome. It's pretty heavy. The more you commit, the darker the green it gets. So we just committed 3 items to our repository, which is our demo test, whip React less than a minute ago, and we can switch over to that item here. And then you can go in there and you can kind of click around. You can see all of our commit messages of what happened there. It's kind of cool. So anyways, but I hope that kind of helps you out. If you have questions or comments, leave them at the bottom and I'll try to answer them for you. Thank you. And next video will be coming up and we'll be doing some build scripts to kind of put in some more securities. Thanks.